What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I promised you yesterday that we would be going over my initial wide receiver rankings for PPR leagues this season. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. And remember, you can, of course, see all of these rankings in list format that are going to be continuously updated throughout training camps and preseason all the way up to the start of the regular season at my Patreon page down in the description. It doesn't matter how much you give. It can be $10, $5, even $1. Whatever you want to give gets you access. Literally anything. It's up to you. So if you want to see these rankings that I'm going to go over today and then have them be continuously updated as we deal with injuries and camp battles and everything we see in the preseason, if you want all those updates, go over to my Patreon page. But for now, let's talk about the initial rankings that I put out here last week at length. Starting with the first round, it's the same names that pretty much everybody else has. They're what I call the easy ones. Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham, and Julio Jones. You literally can't go wrong with any of them. Obviously, these are PPR rankings for a 12-team league, so Antonio Brown's going to be at the top. It's almost guaranteed he's going to get 100 catches again because that's just what he does. He'll get somewhere between 8 and 12 touchdowns because that's what he does. His chemistry with Ben is incredible. Arguably the greatest wide receiver quarterback duo that I have ever seen, if not the best duo that I've ever seen. I did a whole video on that last season if you want to kind of look at that more in depth, but their chemistry together is simply on another level. Same kind of thing, I'm thinking DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson are going to have that same kind of chemistry. They showed it a little bit last year when Deshaun was a rookie, and Hopkins, even without Watson as his quarterback for most of the year, still led the league in touchdowns. He is easily a top 4 receiver in the league, arguably top 3, only behind Brown and Julio. And the reason why I have him ahead of Odell and Julio is for 2 different reasons that don't necessarily have to do with on-the-field play. But Hopkins, his hands are incredible. His body control is incredible. He's a monster in the red zone. He's not as physically talented as all the other receivers that I have in the first round, but just his ability to make contested catches, to bail out his quarterback, and to just always be in the right place at the right time, it has incredible value for fantasy because you know he's going to get the ball no matter what. So I've got him at number 2. And again, you can't go wrong with any of these guys, but I've got Hopkins at number 2. Number 3, I got Odell Beckham, even coming off injury, because he is one of the best examples of a combination of physical talent and technical refinement in the whole league. He is virtually unguardable one-on-one, and of course he still has that chemistry with Eli Manning, which I love. So he's got a great shot at 90 to 100 catches this year. And just looking at overall how the Giants' offense is designed, I know there's a lot of weapons there, which maybe might take away from Odell's targets a little bit. But I think his efficiency per target is going to go up because who are you going to double? If you're dropping 8 guys down in the box to stop Saquon Barkley, who I think is a phenomenal running back talent, I've got him as a first-rounder as well. If you're dropping 8 in the box to stop Saquon, that means automatically you're running single high coverages all game long. And it's not like the free safety is automatically going to be rolling towards Odell either, because you got Evan Ingram there as well, who's a fantastic young receiving tight end who runs a 4.4 and can pretty much burn any linebacker in the league one-on-one. So if you're running Ingram up the seam against a linebacker, whatever Mike linebacker you want to run out there, pretty much none of them can cover him one-on-one. That means the free safety automatically has to stay over the top of Ingram in that seam, which means no matter what, Odell's getting one-on-one outside. Because of that other safety, he's down in the box to stop Barkley. So if you're giving Odell a whole bunch of one-on-one opportunities outside every single game just by how you have to play this offense with 8 in the box and the free safety constantly looking for Ingram in the seams, Odell, with his 4.4 speed and great hands and great route running, is going to get a ton of opportunities downfield. So maybe he won't get as many catches as Hopkins or Brown, but I think his yards per catch is going to be absolute insanity this year because he will have so many one-on-one opportunities. So I think he's going to get a lot of long touchdowns. He's going to get maybe a lot of cheap stuff underneath if they start playing cover 3 just so that they can survive against this offense. So you're going to see a lot of checkdowns, and he's great with yards after catch, so he'll probably get a lot of that too. Maybe between 80 and 90 catches just by nature of having to spread targets around with so many weapons. But his yards per catch this year, I think, is going to be a career high for him just because he's going to get so many one-on-ones outside. I can't wait to see how this Giants offense operates. I think Eli Manning is going to be probably the biggest benefactor of it out of anybody because you kind of have to play them a very unique way that is very exploitable. But overall, week one, I think the Giants are probably going to be one of the teams that I pay most attention to because this offense, I think, is going to be just super explosive. They have playmakers at every single position. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch, and that's a big reason why I've got Odell in my top 3. And then rounding out the top 4 is Julio. There's really not much to say here other than it's Julio Jones. He's been a first-round pick forever because he is such a freak of nature. He's got great chemistry with Matt Ryan. And traditionally in the Falcons offense, no matter who has been running it the last few years, they're going to feed Julio. He's their ex-receiver. He's their go-to guy. He can beat press. He can beat off. He's too fast. He's too big. He's too strong. He can run every route in the book. He is the most gifted receiver in the league. And I broke that down last season with an episode dedicated to him. You know, he is pretty much scheme-proof. You know, he's legitimately scheme-proof. And the only reason why I have him lower than the others is, A, because it seems like he gets random foot injuries at the worst possible times. B, he's a little bit inconsistent where he might have a 50-yard game and then a 200-yard game. So he's a little bit more boom or bust than the others. And C, the holdout, I think it's a legitimate concern, not because it maybe costs him reps or chemistry with Ryan. I think he's at the point in the career where that doesn't really matter to me. What does matter to me is that if you miss training camp with a holdout, you're more likely to get injured because you're not taking as many hits in the camp process in preseason. You know, maybe you're not used to contact, you're not used to being in football shape. And typically we see guys that when they miss a significant portion of the offseason for whatever reason, their re-injury rate is a little bit higher just because they're not fully in football shape. So those first 4 weeks are a little bit concerning for me. I know he's going to come back and play, but those first 4 weeks are a little bit concerning for me because the chance of him getting injured in that first month, if he misses the whole offseason, is a little bit higher, and he's already injury prone as it is. So he's still going to produce, he's still going to put up Julio Jones-like numbers, but overall, I'm a little bit more wary about him getting injured if he misses the full offseason. It's not a major thing, but when I've got Brown and Hopkins and Odell there, it's enough of a thing for me to put him at number 4 instead of maybe at number 2 or 3. Again, you can't go wrong picking him in the first, but if we're splitting hairs here between elite receivers, that's something worth bringing up. And then, you know, going into round 2, I've got a whole host of guys that you could easily make the case for being wide receiver 5 this year, or, you know, in terms of non-fantasy, who is the 5th best receiver in the NFL. Because the top 4 are pretty consensus, but in terms of number 5, there's a big debate. I've got A.J. Green at number 5 here just because he's kind of Mr. Consistent. We know the rapport he's got with Andy Dalton. We know he's going to get fed targets, and I have a little bit more confidence in the Bengals offense as a whole this year. With the additions they made on the offensive line with Billy Price and Cordy Glenn. I think the run game is going to be a lot better, as I said last episode with Joe Mixon, simply because there's going to be more holes to run through. And with a more effective run game, that means the play-action pass game is more effective, and that means that play-action deep bombs to A.J. Green are once again going to be back on the menu. And that's really where he makes his bones, where Andy has, you know, time for a full 7-step drop, and he just tosses it 50 yards down the field to AJ, who's one of the best deep ball receivers in the league. So it's kind of similar to Odell, where I think if you have to drop a safety down in the box to stop Mixon because their run game improves, that automatically gives Green a lot more one-on-one opportunities outside. And even if he doesn't cross the 100-catch threshold like I think Antonio will and how I think Hopkins will, his yards per catch is going to be through the roof compared to last year. So going to get a lot of touchdowns, going to get a lot of deep balls, and I'm super high on him this year. And then just below him, I've got a trio of receivers that everybody just seems to kind of be flip-flopping because they're all basically the same in terms of expected production. You got Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, and Keenan Allen. Allen I have as the 3rd guy solely because of his injury history. I think he could very easily outproduce the others because he has great chemistry with Phillip Rivers. He's probably the best pure route runner of this whole group. Maybe the best route runner in the league. I mean, his releases are teaching tape for everyone. It's truly incredible what he does at the line of scrimmage. But because of that injury history, I'm a little bit more cautious with him than maybe Davante Adams or Michael Thomas. Adams, even with his concussions, I'm still a little bit more cautious with Keenan Allen because his injury history is longer, even going back to his days at Cal. Part of the reason why he dropped to the 3rd round in the draft in the first place was because of his medical history. He's got the torn ACL. He had that hip issue a couple years ago. when he's on the field, phenomenal, unbelievable production, but you can't guarantee he's going to be on the field for the full year. So it's a little bit riskier than the other two. Thomas, I think, is the most consistent. Adams and Allen probably have the most upside, but Adams, I think, is safer with that upside than Allen is, just because of that injury history, if that makes sense. So if you want consistency, Thomas. If you want upside, Adams or Allen. And if you want safer upside, Adams. So they're all probably going to end up around the same point total, around the same ranking, but there's very, very minute distinctions, and it's really just up to personal preference, kind of like those top four. It all just comes down to what you prefer. And then just below that group, if you look at tier 1 with the top 4, and then there's kind of tier 2 with Green, Thomas, Allen, and Adams, or Adams and Allen, however you want to rank them. And then Mike Evans is kind of his own tier at tier 2A. And that's mostly because of the Jameis Winston suspension. I think he's going to have a slower start to the year than the others, because I've seen enough Ryan Fitzpatrick to know that while he does like to force the ball to his wide receiver 1, I can't guarantee that it's going to get there at the right place at the right time. So it's a little bit riskier. He can put up monster numbers with Fitzpatrick because, again, Fitzpatrick completely ignores tight ends in favor of big body wide receivers. So if you feel like he's going to get funneled a whole bunch of targets from Fitzpatrick, cool, that's fine. I totally get that. I understand that argument. He may have a great first 3 weeks, but it's less predictable than everybody else in this tier. Bigger boom, bigger bust. So that's why he's mostly in that tier 2A. When it comes to playoff time, if you make the playoffs and he's got Jameis Winston, he'll be fine. But those first 3 weeks, when you're trying to kind of establish an early lead in your division, in your fantasy, there's a potential that he might be a little bit disappointing production-wise. It won't kill your season, but it's enough of a concern to drop him into kind of his own tier 2A behind the other 4. And then moving on to round 3, we have a whole bunch of super high upside, again, boomer bust type guys from all over the spectrum in terms of reasons why they are boomer bust. You got Allen Robinson, who is coming off an ACL, but ACL recoveries, I think, are a little bit different than they were 5 years ago, so I'm not as concerned about that. And he doesn't have that extensive of an injury history. It's not like we're talking about Alshon Jeffery here, who seems to have a hamstring injury or a shoulder injury every single year. So I'm not as concerned about that, but I think he also has a great fit skill set wise for this Bears offense. They really needed an X receiver with a catch radius to help out Mitch Trubisky, both in the red zone and on third downs. Like if you just need somebody you can throw a fade to on 3rd and 7 to move the chains, Robinson's going to be that kind of guy. I know they're going to spread a lot of targets out because they have weapons all over the place, especially with Tyreek Cohen and the young guy they brought in, Anthony Miller. But I think Allen, again, he's going to be that guy who, because I expect the Bears' run game to be better, again, I went over that last episode, you're going to have to drop a safety down to kind of limit Jordan Howard. Just like I said with Green and Beckham, that gives Robinson one-on-ones automatically outside, which he has the physical talent to take advantage of. So, maybe he won't get 95 catches, but I think he can get 80 to 85 catches and have his yards per catch drastically increase just because he's going to get a lot more one-on-one opportunities. And then below him, even more of a boomer bust, I think, is going to be Josh Gordon. Arguably, along with Julio Jones, the most physically talented receiver in the league. He's bigger and stronger and faster than every DB except probably Jalen Ramsey. No matter who he's on, it's going to be a physical mismatch. So he's really only limited by quarterback situation, and I'm not necessarily worried about off-the-field situation. I don't care that he smoked weed. I only care that he kept getting suspended for it. It's not a huge deal. I don't think he's going to get suspended for it again because I think he's kind of off of that. But it's still something you have to account for. I would be lying if I said I wasn't accounting for it. But as long as he's on the field and he's not suspended and his quarterback play is just average, he'll probably put up wide receiver 1 numbers. So he's a big boom candidate, a minor bust candidate, which is why he's kind of settled in the 3rd round instead of the 5th round. He'll probably end up being on a bunch of my teams, assuming I don't like the running back options in the 3rd. Again, you just kind of got to let the draft come to you. He's somebody that I'm putting up directly against the Christian McCaffrey and J.J.'s of the world. It depends on who's there and who's on the board, but he's somebody that I've been targeting a lot in my drafts just because of the insanely high upside he brings. And then behind him, I have Doug Baldwin, who, obviously does not have the upside of Gordon, but I think he's a little bit more consistent than Gordon. He's a PPR monster, just alongside Keenan Allen and Antonio Brown, one of the very elite route runners in the league, arguably the best slot receiver in the league. Russell has great chemistry with him. You can pretty much lock him in for 85 to 95 catches and probably between 7 and 10 touchdowns. He is the rock of your receiving core, kind of like how I was talking about Christian McCaffrey maybe being the rock of your running back core. He's not going to have those 25 to 30 point games like AJ Green will or like Antonio Brown will, where he will single-handedly win you a week. But he's less volatile in a sense that you can pretty much rely on 13 to 15 points a week. And he's going to produce. He'll give you a baseline point total that you can count on every single week. And then you just have to hope that your higher upside guys like Josh Gordon's and Allen Robinson's will pull through with a big game to kind of win you the week. So if you go with maybe a more bigger boom or bust player in rounds 1 or 2, and you want something that you can just count on for a stable producer of points in round 3, that's going to be Doug Baldwin for you. Brandin Cooks, I think, kind of fills in that boom or bust option like I was just talking about, except to a lesser degree than Josh Gordon and Allen Robinson. He'll have his big weeks of 25 points. He'll have his weeks of probably 8 or 9 points. And you're rolling with it. If you take a more stable option like DeAndre Hopkins or Antonio Brown early, and you want a wide receiver too that can, not saying that Antonio and Brown and Hopkins won't take over games themselves, but if you want somebody who can go off for 25 points and really hand you a victory all by himself, that's going to be Brandin Cooks. Sean McVay loves him. I think he's going to be a better deep threat for LA than Sammy Watkins was, because he's just straight up a better receiver than Sammy Watkins. He's a great route runner. He's got good hands. He's got good yards after catch skills. Again, he'll be more inconsistent than Baldwin, but I think his peaks are higher than Baldwin, even if his valleys are lower. So you take him just to kind of balance out maybe safer earlier picks. If you want somebody that can just kind of push you over the top of those big games, that's going to be Brandin Cooks. And then right behind him, Stefon Diggs and Amari Cooper, it's the exact same thing. Higher peaks, lower valleys. If you take safer early picks, these are guys you want to target at round 3 that can go off on any given week and totally win you the game. Don't expect consistency, especially for Diggs, because he's got the injury issues that seems to constantly affect every single year except last year. And of course, Thielen is there to steal targets. Dalvin's there to steal targets. So he is very much a bigger boom and bigger bust option from week to week. But man, when he booms hard. Same thing for Amari. Jordy's there to maybe steal a few targets here and there. But when Amari has those 200-yard games and single-handedly wins you a week, he looks like a pretty good pick. So again, round 3 is all about the boom or bust targets. If you don't feel comfortable with them, if maybe you have a more volatile first and second round pick, like AJ Green is a classic case of he will put up 5 points and then he will put up 30 points. If you take AJ Green in round 2, you probably don't want to follow that up with a boom or bust in round 3. You would follow that up with Doug Baldwin. But if you take more stable options in rounds 1 and 2 that maybe don't have as high of a ceiling from week to week, then that's where Diggs and Cooper come in to kind of give your team that dynamic element. I've said this point about 5 different ways now, so I'll just leave it there. Round 4, T.Y. Hilton, again, kind of a boomer bust kind of guy who's solely reliant on Andrew Luck being healthy. I dropped him down a round compared to where a lot of people have him solely because we don't know what Luck's health is. We know he's throwing balls, but we just don't know if he's going to be available week 1. We don't know what the durability of the shoulder is once he starts taking hits. So it's a little bit more concerning for me than his round 3 ADP where he's at right now. So I dropped him down a little bit, just accounting for that. If Luck is fully healthy, he might even put up wide receiver 1 numbers, but we just don't know if he's healthy yet. So that's something that I'm going to monitor, and his value is going to go way up or down based on that. Demaryius Thomas, he's had a little bit of injury issues this summer, and I think his quarterback situation is not that much better than it was last year. I'm not a super big fan of Case Keenum. I know he had a good year last year, but I've seen enough Case Keenum as a Texans fan in my life to know that he is a replacement level quarterback. He's an average at best quarterback. Will he feed the ball to Demaryius Thomas? Yes. Will it get to the right spot at the right time? Can't guarantee that. kind of just like Ryan Fitzpatrick. You can't guarantee that even if he gets a lot of targets, they're going to be quality targets because the guy throwing him the ball just is not that good. I still can't believe they passed on Josh Rosen in the first round, but I already did a video on that. You don't want to hear me go over that again. So Demaryius Thomas is round 4. Because they just drafted a couple receivers behind him that I think are eventually going to be his replacement, and I think they're going to steal snaps and targets from him, B, the injury issues, C, the quarterback situation. Still can put up a productive year, but I don't think we're ever going to see the Demaryius Thomas of old under Peyton Manning ever again. And that's how it is. So good player, not a great fantasy player anymore. Golden Tate, similar to Doug Baldwin, he's going to be your maybe not as high upside play, but your stability play. So if you're going for the boom or bust guys early, Golden Tate's going to be somebody maybe you balance out your roster with in round 4. I've expanded a little bit my thoughts previously on how I expect the Lions offense to vastly improve. I think they're going to be a top 7 or 8 offense this year, and Tate's going to be one of the biggest benefactors of that. He's going to get a ton of catches, probably 90 plus catches. Not as high yards per catch as some of the other receivers on this list, but in terms of PPR volume, he's going to be your guy that you look for those easy 12 to 13 points every single week. So I like him a lot as your stability option. Tyreek Hill, boom or bust. I dropped him down a round because kind of like how I said for Kareem Hunt yesterday, we don't know what Mahomes is yet. So if you want my full thoughts on the Mahomes situation, you can look at that. Yesterday, I did a whole spiel on that. So because we don't know what Mahomes is yet, I dropped all the Chiefs down, including Tyreek Hill, by a round. If Mahomes booms, Hill will boom even harder, but we just don't know yet. Alshon Jeffery is probably going to be a little bit more consistent than the other guys in this tier, meaning Hilton and Thomas and Hill and Thielen. On a week-to-week basis, I think he has a higher floor than them. Maybe not as high of a ceiling, but certainly a higher floor. Where his inconsistency comes from and ultimately where his round 4 grade comes from is his injury issues in the past. It seems like he's never been healthy, ever, never been fully healthy. He played through injury last year and was productive, but it's just a fact that when you draft Alshon Jeffery, you expect him to be hurt. You expect him to potentially miss some games or at the very least have his production affected by his health issues. Still a great player, but I'm just not 100% sure he's going to be on the field for all 16 games, so I'm accounting for that in his draft grade. And then behind him, round 4, I've got JuJu Smith-Schuster, a little bit higher than some other people have him, but I think he was the best rookie receiver in the NFL last year. I don't even think that's a debate. Great route runner, great yards after catch skills, better speed than I expected. So he's a legitimate deep threat too. So I like him a lot, both on tape and situation-wise. I think you could argue, honestly, taking him over most of the guys in this round if you really like the Steelers' offense. He's less proven than a lot of the guys in this tier, except for maybe Tyreek Hill. So he's less proven than them, but the upside is there for him to maybe be like a second or third round pick next year if he performs like I think he's going to perform. So it's kind of weird how his floor is higher than some of these guys simply because I think he's going to get a higher target share. But his ceiling is also higher than some of these guys too because he's an ascending second-year receiver in a great offense who's probably not going to see a lot of double coverage because Antonio Brown's one of the few number 1 wide receivers that gets legitimately double-teamed on a lot of snaps. So, maybe I am lower than him now that I think about it. I'm kind of talking myself into this. Maybe I am lower on him than I should be. Because his floor is high and his ceiling is high, I might actually move him up throughout this process. But I'm keeping him here for now because I feel like round 4 is probably higher than most people have him anyway. But if I see flashes of him improving even more throughout training camp and the preseason, I might legitimately move him up to the top of round 4. So keep an eye on for that. Again, check my Patreon rankings as I update them because he could go way up or down over the next 5 weeks. I'm kind of talking myself into that as I record this. Moving on to round 5, Will Fuller. I feel like I'm continuing the theme of the day, boom or bust. He goes as Deshaun Watson goes, and he goes as his injury issues go. I feel like he hasn't been fully healthy for a full season yet in his career, in his first 3 years. But when he is healthy, He's a really, really good receiver. More of a Deshaun Jackson than a Stefon Diggs. He does run a full route tree, but he really makes his money on deep balls like Deshaun did early in his career. And now he has a quarterback that can actually throw a pretty good deep ball, which I did not expect out of Deshaun coming out. His deep ball at Clemson was not as good as it is now. So that was super surprising. But Deshaun Watson had one of the greatest rookie campaigns coming out of nowhere that he had the greatest rookie campaign that I've ever seen. So he's defying all expectations as a quarterback, which means Fuller will probably defy all expectations as a receiver as long as he stays healthy. I've got him in the 5th round because he can produce like a wide receiver too when Deshaun's healthy and when he's healthy. We saw that last year. His touchdown to catch ratio was unprecedented. I mean, it was absolute insanity. And I'm not saying he's going to repeat those numbers. I'm not saying he's going to repeat that ratio, but with this quarterback in this system and with Fuller's skill set, he could very easily finish in like the top 6 or 7 in touchdowns. Because, again, Hopkins is one of the few receivers in this league that demands double coverage on every single snap, which means Fuller's going to get one-on-ones outside. And when you give Will Fuller one-on-one outside with Deshaun throwing him the ball, that's 6. We saw that last year, and I think we're going to see it again this year. So round 5 is way higher than a lot of people have him, but I mean, I watched every Texans game last year with this offense fully operational and healthy, and they were legit. Like, this was legit. And I'm excited to see what they do this year as long as they all stay healthy. I think Fuller's going to be a monster. Below him, I got Jarvis Landry. Again, kind of keeping with the theme of balancing out the boom or bust picks with the stability picks. I think Jarvis is going to be the go-to guy on 3rd downs in this Browns offense. I think no matter who is throwing him the ball, whether it's Tyrod or Baker, I think he's probably going to rack up 90-plus catches. He's one of the best slot receivers in the league, especially in a PPR. That's super valuable. So he's your stability option if you've already loaded up to this point with maybe more boom or bust options. He's a guy who can kind of round out the skill set of your fantasy team. Marvin Jones, maybe not as stable as Golden, but he can pop off every now and then. I think he's probably the best deep threat in this Detroit offense, which, as I said many times before, is going to be way better than it was last year. Not that they were bad last year, but I think it's going to be one of the best offenses in the league. And Stafford is one of the best deep ball receivers in the league. Receivers? Quarterback. I mean, if you want to see Stafford run routes, whatever, but Stafford's one of the best deep ball quarterbacks in the league. So I think Jones, you definitely not going to get as many catches as Tate. Probably lock him in for somewhere between 70 and 80 catches. Probably at least close to 1,000 yards and between 8 and 10 touchdowns. And, it's tough to figure out who's going to have more points total between Tate and Jones. It probably just depends on league format. But I don't really think you can go wrong taking either one of them because I think the offense as a whole is going to be really good, and I think you can be satisfied with either one of them. If you miss out on Tate in round 4, taking Jones in round 5 is perfectly acceptable. I'm totally cool with that. I think either one of them you can slot in as a wide receiver 2, or in Jones's case as a wide receiver, like a high upside wide receiver 3 or a flex play and be just fine. Larry Fitz, again, stability option to kind of balance out the boomer bust picks. We know he's going to get 80 catches because it doesn't matter how old Larry is. He's going to get 80 catches. And yards per catch is way down compared to when he was in his prime, but he's a super savvy slot receiver. And I think whether it's Sam Bradford or Josh Rosen, they're going to lean on him a lot to move the chains because that's just what Larry does. So in a PPR league, he has a lot more value than in other formats, but with the amount of with the volume I expect him to get as their primary chain mover and as the best slot receiver on the team, Larry is a guy that I think you can balance out the booms with his stability. Round 6, man, it is all boom or all bust with Sammy. We've seen that throughout his entire career. Whether it was LA, whether it was Buffalo, it doesn't matter. He can do absolutely nothing, and then he can win you a week. So I have him round 6. A lot of people have him round 5, but I dropped him again because of the Mahomes factor. His value can go up if Mahomes is a good quarterback. Right now I'm being cautious with him. But if Mahomes is an upgrade in the KC offense, and with Watkins' ability as a deep ball receiver, and with Mahomes' arm strength, that could be deadly. That could be like another Will Fuller situation like we saw last year, where if you're leaving Sammy one-on-one because maybe safeties are a little bit more scared of Hill's speed downfield, if you're leaving Sammy one-on-one, he has the ability to take any ball to the house from anywhere on the field. So the boom is really big boom. The bust is really big bust, because we don't know what Mahomes is, and because Sammy just, by his very nature, his entire career he's been a boom or bust receiver. Now that is amplified threefold because of the quarterback situation. So if you feel like you've been playing it safe through rounds 1 and 5 in your draft, Sammy's a guy you can look at to give you kind of a dynamic element to your team. It's risky, but if it pays off, you're going to win the league. But it is risky, so just keep that in mind. Corey Davis, he's probably the biggest unknown in this tier, which is saying a lot because I have Sammy Watkins in this round as well. But he was hurt a lot last year, so we didn't get to see maybe as much, or at least as much of a healthy Corey Davis as we wanted to. But coming out, I thought he was a really good player. Not as physically gifted as Hogan or Watkins, not even remotely close. But he's a great route runner, and he's super physical at the line of scrimmage. So I think he's a natural fit as the X receiver for this team. And I did a full breakdown of the offense under Matt LaFleur a couple weeks ago, expecting Davis to be the X receiver on this team, which means he's going to be a huge benefactor for all the play action shots they take downfield on those deep over routes coming off the bootleg on the backside. So I think he's going to get big plays just off of that. Like, just schematically, they're going to create big play opportunities for him. And because of his route running prowess, because of his physicality, I think he has a really good shot of hitting 1,000 yards and, I don't want to say double-digit touchdowns, but somewhere around there. He's going to be the number one receiver for this team, I think. And he's certainly, when he's healthy, I think he's the best receiver on this team. And considering the overall uptick that I expect the offense to see this year under Matt LaFleur, he's going to be a big benefactor of that. So that's why I have him in the 6th round. Again, maybe a little bit earlier than some people are comfortable with, but I think he's going to be a massively improved player from year 1 to year 2. And then, round 7, it's kind of a weird mix between high upside players that can vastly outperform this draft range and maybe descending players that might do a lot worse. So like Marquise Goodwin, I think his upside is like 1,200 yards and double-digit touchdowns. That's his upside, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback and a better run game and a better offensive line, which can then protect Garoppolo for a longer amount of time to take those deep shots to him. So he can very easily put up those kind of numbers. Garoppolo's deep ball isn't the best in the league, but Goodwin is so damn fast that I think he can probably adjust a little bit better than maybe most deep ball receivers. He's a legitimate kind of 4-2 guy that you just throw it as deep as possible and throw it away from the safety, and I think Goodwin has the speed to run under it and help out his quarterback a little bit. So that's where his upside comes from. Edelman, he's this low because of his suspension, but when he comes back, he'll be certainly a stable 5+ catch a week kind of receiver, because that's what Julian Edelman is. Jordy, he's more of a descending player that we don't really know what to do with yet, so he might do better or worse than this range. We probably won't know for a few weeks when we see him in camp, and obviously in the preseason. Like week 3, the preseason is going to be big for him because we'll get a better idea of how they intend to use him. We'll get a better idea of where he stands physically now at his age. I don't expect him to be the deep threat that he used to be, but he's such a good route runner that I wouldn't be surprised if Amari is the primary deep receiver and Jordy's more of a possession receiver, working those back shoulder fades that he used to with Rodgers on the sideline. Carr can throw that ball really well, at least place it really well back shoulder. That's one of his best throws, I think, is the back shoulder fade. So I think Nelson, he can still have a lot of value in a PPR league, because if he does take over that kind of possession receiver role, we're looking at him getting 80+ catches, which is big for him. Definitely less yards per catch than he used to have, but volume-wise, I think he can almost kind of be like the new Larry Fitzgerald. The former elite receiver that's aging, not as physically talented as he used to be, but still super savvy, knows how to run a really good route. Almost like not just Fitz, but almost like Jason Witten, where he's just so technically refined that he can still produce even at his advanced age. So Jordy can be that kind of guy, but we won't know for maybe another month and a half if that's the role he's going to take. So keep an eye on that. He can go way up or down based on how the Raiders use him. It's a totally new situation. Randall Cobb, I think, is in a similar kind of boat. He can go way up or way down, depending on what I think his new role is going to be in this offense. He was never the number one. I'm not saying he ever was. But we don't automatically know that Jordy moving on to Oakland is going to somehow increase Cobb's targets, because for all we know, they really like Geronimo Allison, who's going to get a big uptick in targets. So we can't say that Cobb is going to benefit from Jordy not being in the building, because we don't know if his role is changing. We don't know if his target share is changing. We know he has good chemistry with Rodgers. We know he's probably the best slot receiver on the team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the guy that Rodgers looks for on third down. I think he's definitely going to be looking for Adams first, but Cobb might be the fourth guy in line behind Jimmy Graham and Aaron Jones, or maybe even Geronimo Allison. He could be the fifth guy in line. There's a lot of talented receivers there that can take over that chain-moving role. Like they can all do it. So I'm a little bit worried about Cobb. He can perform like a seventh-round pick as like a wide receiver 3, but is not guaranteed, so his ranking can go way up or down based on what we see throughout the rest of the preseason and, of course, training camp, and, of course, with injuries and stuff, too. So that's another thing where keep an eye on the Patreon as I update the rankings. I'll be looking at this situation very, very closely, because the Green Bay receiving core outside of Adams is pretty hard to figure out, and Cobb is one of the hardest parts of that to figure out. And then Mo Sanu, Emmanuel Sanders, Davante Parker are all kind of in the same boat. Sanu and Sanders are high upside wide receiver 2s on their own teams. Sanders, I think, actually could probably get more catches than Demaryius. I think he'll be more stable than Demaryius. Not as big of a boom, clearly, because Demaryius, I think, has better red zone value. But I think stability-wise, he's a guy you can take as a wide receiver 3 and count on him to get double-digit points, even with Case Keenan at quarterback. I think he's a better route runner than Thomas. I think he has better hands than Thomas. I think he'll be a guy that Case looks to on third down to move the chains. So I like him a lot as a wide receiver 3, just to really stabilize your receiving core. Sanu's the same kind of way. I like him a lot as a very stable wide receiver 3 that you can count on to get 4 catches and 60 yards a game. They'll throw him some deep balls here and there, but he's not going to be in the slot. That's going to be Calvin Ridley's job. But when they run those 2 wide receiver sets, I think Sanu, if he gets one-on-one coverage, he's definitely a good enough receiver for Matt to take advantage of that on those curl routes that he loves to throw to Sanu 3 times a game. Like, when you watch the Falcons offense, that's really what they take advantage of. They'll go into 12 personnel, Julio's going to get the safety over the top, and then Sanu's backside one-on-one, and Matt throws an easy curl off like a 3-step drop, and it's automatic first down. They do that a whole lot. So that's where a lot of Sanu's value comes from, is like just that stable point floor that you can assume he's going to get. And then Davante Parker, I think obviously a bigger boom than those 2 guys, who are a little bit more stable, because he is the number 1 wide receiver in Miami, and Jarvis Landry's gone now, so you expect kind of an uptick in targets. And Ryan Tannehill, I think, in his 3rd year in this system, I think is going to be a much better quarterback. I'll go more in depth into why I think that when I break down the quarterbacks next week. Early next week is when I think that's coming out. Long story short, though, this is a very hard system to learn, and usually it takes a couple years for it to fully take shape on a new team. Like, it's very, very language intensive. It's a very cerebral system. It takes a while for it to gel. So I think Tannehill, being in his 3rd year in the system, he knows it now. He knows all the language. He knows all the checks. He knows all the protections. I think he's going to be better this year than he was in his 1st year under Gase a couple years ago. He's going to be better this year, which means Parker's going to be better this year. And as long as Parker stays healthy, he's actually a really physically gifted receiver. Like, people don't give him enough credit for how talented he is. Very inconsistent his first few years in the league, but he has a lot of talent. And I think he's in a system now, and he has a quarterback that understands the system now. I think they're actually going to feed him the ball more than people think. And I think he has the talent to take advantage of that. Whether or not he'll be a stable option from week to week, I don't really have any confidence in saying that yet. Again, he's a guy whose value can go way up or down over the next 5 weeks as we observe training camp and observe preseason and all that kind of stuff. But I think his booms, I think he is the kind of guy that can come out of nowhere and put up a 20-point week and win you the game. So as a very high upside wide receiver 3, I'm excited about him for that reason. And I think stability-wise, that's the only question we have in terms of what's his point floor from week to week. The point ceiling we know is very high. The point floor is the question, and I think that's a question that we can answer together over the next month and a half or so before the start of the regular season. And once we do answer that question in terms of, what's his floor, that will determine his overall value. So he can go way up, he can go way down. We'll just kind of have to figure it out as we watch him. And then moving on to round 8, again, it's a mix of flex options, high upside wide receiver 3s, stable wide receiver 3s. Mike Williams, super boom or bust guy. I loved him coming out of Clemson. Health has been his main issue, but I think he's going to get a lot of red zone targets now that Hunter Henry is hurt. I think you can count on him for, well, maybe not count on him, but I think you can reasonably think that he could get double-digit touchdowns this year, which is pretty good for a wide receiver 3. I don't think he's going to get a ton of volume in this offense just because Keenan Allen is there, who's going to suck up a whole bunch of targets. I think Melvin Gordon is going to suck up a bunch of targets because he's a pretty good receiving back. He might legitimately be the third option at best for this team, receiving-wise for Phillip Rivers. But the types of targets he's going to get can drastically increase his point total because I think he's going to be that primary red zone option. So would it shock me if he had 12 touchdowns this year? Not particularly. He can probably put up like tight end, quote unquote, type numbers for you, where it's not a huge volume, but he gets a bunch of red zone work. And to me, that's totally fine for wide receiver 3. If I'm throwing him in there at wide receiver 3 and he gets 15 points for me on 3 catches, cool. I'm fine with that because points are points. And you could do a lot worse than that with an 8th round pick. Certainly a lot worse than that with a wide receiver 3. So I'm higher on him than most are, but it's because I know that his ceiling from week to week is higher than most receivers in this range, and I'm willing to bet on that. Moving on beyond Williams, you got Jamison Crowder, who's your typical, slot receiver, high floor, hope that he can get 4 to 5 catches for you, get you to double-digit points, and just be that stable flex option or wide receiver 3. There's a million of those in the league these days. Michael Crabtree, he'll probably get a whole bunch of targets in Baltimore because who else do they have? So, again, he's not a super high ceiling, but he's got a high floor, which this late, if you're looking for a wide receiver 3, that's a pretty good quality to have. Devin Funchess, I might actually move him down because he's probably the 4th option at best in Carolina. I know they might look to him in the red zone, but if I was going to guess any one of these guys that I was going to drop down between now and the start of the season, it's probably Devin Funchess. Probably, just because he's not a great route runner. His hands are inconsistent. I'm actually kind of talking myself into dropping him as we speak. I actually might take everybody else that I have in this tier over him now that I think about it, which is Cooper Kupp, Robbie Anderson, and Robert Woods. All more stable options from week to week than Funchess. Kupp certainly, I think, is going to be a target hog, even with Brandin Cooks and Robert Woods there. Robert Woods, I think, has a little bit more red zone utility, and I think he's a better deep threat than Kupp. So yards per catch wise will be higher than Kupp, but Kupp will have more reception. So overall, their point totals might actually be very similar. But the Rams offense is going to be one of the best in the league this year. So any piece of it you can get this late in the draft is fine by me. And then Robbie Anderson, I think, is probably the best receiver for the Jets, and I think he's going to be a target hog in New York. Still not super enthusiastic about the running back situation or the offensive line situation, but the quarterback situation, I think, has vastly improved with Sam Darnold. Whether or not he starts early in the year, I don't particularly care. I think, ironically, the Jets have one of the best quarterback rooms in the league between McCown, Bridgewater, and Darnold. So no matter who's throwing him the ball, I think Robbie Anderson's probably going to get between 80 and 90 catches this year, which this late in the draft, when you're looking for a wide receiver 3, that's a pretty good value. So Anderson's a guy that I think actually has a potential to rise above round 8 if I think he's going to get as many targets as I expect. And then, round 9, kind of like with the running backs, this is where we start to get into the bench warmers, the depth plays, the flyers, the Hail Marys. Allen Hurns is purely a depth play. I don't think he's a particularly great receiver, but he'll probably get volume because there's literally nobody else in Dallas except for Cole Beasley. So he's somebody you can stash on your bench as kind of a break-in case of emergency kind of receiver. Nelson Aguilar, same kind of thing. He's definitely a better receiver than Hurns, but in the Philly offense, he's probably the 4th option. behind Alshon, Ertz, Sproles on third down, maybe Clement on third down. But again, he's kind of that break glass in case of emergency kind of receiver. Quincy Enunwa, I think, actually might even be able to challenge Robbie Anderson for the number one job in New York. I think he was on the fast track to being the number one before he got hurt last year. So we'll see what he looks like coming off injury. But he's actually this whole Jets receiving core is actually much better than people expect. It might be actually the best unit on the whole roster, their receiving core. There's a lot of high upside guys there. But, that's something we'll monitor throughout training camp and preseason. We'll monitor how he's coming back from injury. If he looks better, then maybe he will actually swap spots with Anderson, or maybe kind of, be right next to him, kind of like how I have Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods essentially right next to each other. So that's something we'll monitor. Again, his value can fluctuate over the next 5 weeks. We don't know exactly what everything's going to look like yet. Sterling Shepard, very stable option with the Giants offense. I talked about him a little bit earlier when I was talking about Odell. He can get you 4 catches and maybe 60 yards a game, kind of get you to double-digit points. Just, high floor, low ceiling kind of receiver that you look for late in this draft. Maybe be your wide receiver 3 or your emergency flex kind of guy. Tyler Lockett, a little bit more of a boom or bust player, but he's a really good route runner. I think he's got really good deep speed and really good hands. He hasn't really had a good opportunity yet in Seattle. To be more than just their flashy return guy. But now that Paul Richardson's gone, I think he's going to be the primary deep threat in that offense. And obviously, Doug Baldwin is going to be the main chain mover. So if they do take shots downfield, it probably will be to Lockett, which is where his boomer bust value comes from. But he has the speed and he has the route running ability and he has the hands to maybe put up some big weeks. Almost in kind of like a Kenny Stills kind of way, where he'll disappear for most of the season and then he'll show up and put up 20 points. So you're only playing him if you don't have any other options, but he has the opportunity and he has the skill set to pay off that risk if he's on your bench. So again, he'll be your wide receiver 4 at best, but he's a high upside wide receiver 4, which this late in the draft has value. And then round 10 and round 11 and round 11 plus, again, it's a whole bunch of bench guys. It's high floor slot receivers that you're playing if people are on bye and you need a quick option. The Danny Amendolas. Christian Kirk and Kiki Kuti are 2 rookies that I think you can file away as maybe late season waiver wire targets if they haven't blown up already by then. They're both really good route runners. They've got good deep speed, good yards after catch ability. I think they're probably better dynasty plays than they are redraft plays this year, but they're definitely 2 rookies to watch. Calvin Ridley, I think, is a similar kind of thing. I think he's going to be in the slot a lot in his rookie year, but they drafted him specifically to replace Mohamed Sanu. So he's probably better in a dynasty format, similar to Kirk and QT, but he does have some redraft value late in the season if you're sustaining injuries, or maybe he does emerge as a favorite target of Matt Ryan on third downs. We don't know yet, but he's kind of that high upside rookie flyer that you like to take in this range of the draft. And then again, it's a whole bunch of guys like your D.D. Westbrooks and your Cole Beasleys and your Brandon LaFells, and then your other high upside rookies like Cortland Sutton or Michael Gallup that are probably more valuable in dynasty leagues. This tier is really all over the place, and it's probably going to be the tier that is the most volatile between now and the start of September. So if you want to keep up with all the updates to these rankings, because I guarantee you everything round 11 plus is going to be shuffled around as we see them play on the field and as people get hurt and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's the tier that's going to change the most. If you want to see all my updates to how the preseason affects all these different rankings, certainly going to affect them more than the running backs, I think, because there's a lot more volatile situations in this position group. And if you want to keep track of all these changes I'm making from week to week, like I said earlier, any donation to the Patreon will get you access to all of these updates on a weekly basis throughout training camp and throughout preseason. I'm going to be monitoring all of these different receiving cores very closely and making the appropriate changes because they're going to go all over the place depending on what we see on tape. So again, it can be as little as $1, and that gets you access. I don't want to lock anything behind a super expensive tier because I know everybody has different financial situations. So whatever you want to give, that's cool with me. You're all helping to support the channel one way or another. So thank you again for watching, and thank you guys also, of course, for your support that you've given me over the last couple years. We've been building a really special community here, and thank you for all the feedback you've given me, all the feedback you guys have given each other. I think together as a community, we're going to win a lot of you guys a lot of leagues this year. So fingers crossed for that. Check back again next week. I'll be looking at quarterbacks. I'll be looking at tight ends. And there's a lot of really interesting discussions to be had about these quarterback rankings. I'm probably a lot different than most, like with all these other rankings too. But I think you guys are going to have a really cool discussion about it. So I'll see you back next week with those. And until then, later.